welcome to DAWG DAZE, where we talk about all things cannabis. I'm your hostess with the mostest, Holly B. My guest today is Christine Stenquist, who is a brain tumor survivor, mother of 4, and the founder of Truce, a Utah-based nonprofit that helped pass the state's first medical laws. A longtime advocate and patient, she continues to speak out for the compassionate access and policy reform. Her journey proves that healing can spark a movement and that one voice really can change everything. Welcome to the Doghouse, Christine.
Thank you so much. Thank you. Thank you. Finally, Holly, I'm so glad to finally meet you.
I know. There was a little scheduling conflict, and then you got sick. Oh,
I
no.
was sick for a minute. I really was. And you guys, you and your son have been so patient and so kind, helping me get in that schedule, knowing that I'm a patient. You guys were great. So I'm really happy to finally be able to be with you camera to camera.
Well, you bounced back well.
Thank you. Thank you.
You
A
look
little
good.
makeup, a little spackle, a little water and soap goes a long way. I know how to put it in all the right places.
So we have a lot to talk about. You've been in the cannabis space for a long time. So let's just start from the beginning. How did you get into the cannabis space?
That's a story. That is a story. Like so many that I have come to meet, it was because of an illness. I am a brain tumor patient. Back in 1996, I was 24. I was working at a local hospital in the lab. I was walking specimens from the ER to the lab, and I had a sharp pain shoot across my face and passed out. My colleagues, the staff, took me to a CT scan, and they discovered a tumor. I was scheduled for surgery to have the tumor removed. It was an acoustic neuroma, but it was growing really close to my brainstem, and so there was a desire to, circumvent a potential problem. And I went into brain surgery, and they told me that I had a 50% survival because of how close the brainstem was and the complications and everything. I was encouraged to get like a living will, to just get my things in order. At the time, I was a mother of a 5-year-old and a 3-year-old, and newly divorced, and trying to really just start my life over. It was a devastating blow to have at 24. During the surgery, they hit a blood vessel, and I hemorrhaged. They got and slipped into a coma. They got 40% of the tumor removed, but decided not to go any further in the removal process because of the hemorrhaging and the difficulty they had stopping the bleed. That led to a lot of recovery, as you can imagine. Being a stroke victim, I had a lot of speech therapy. I had to learn to walk, talk. Being young and obstinate, I had a lot of angst in me to really push through that. The struggle I had, though, was pain and a lot of the subsequent issues that came afterwards, where I never really could get my body back in shape. I had to apply for disability, and I lived a life of a lot of isolation and solitude because it took so much energy just to run a family. And as many people know, just trying to run your own household and keep yourself afloat was difficult. But you throw in this illness and this condition, it just made things really more difficult. I was on disability and struggling, and it was a challenge. It was an absolute challenge. I got married, and I had a couple more kids, still dealing with a lot of issues with my condition, never really getting full recovery. Once you break the melon, it's hard to put it right back together, or as Humpty Dumpty, right? And it was led to a lot of depression and pain, a lot of visits to doctor's offices, a lot of failed pharmaceutical drugs, a lot of medical gaslighting. And I think a lot of people, including veterans, can relate to this, where they're disease states, their illnesses are dismissed or minimized. And it leads to that mental and emotional breakdown where you're self-doubting and like, I should do better, I should be better. And it just sends a person into a spiral. Again, in not accounting for our already other illnesses and conditions that go on. So for me, I was really in a battle. I was feeling incredibly unheard, in a lot of physical, mental, and emotional pain. Dealing with, on top of it, let's be honest, for me, the struggles of being a woman in running a household, the responsibilities, the emotional labor that goes behind a lot of that. And it's really took a toll on my body. It was really challenged. I was bedridden and housebound for 16 years, not really being able to have much of a life because any energy that I could have could only make it outside my bedroom door and never truly outside my walls of my home because it was just so little. I got to a point, I would cycle where I would be on drugs, pharmaceutical drugs for a while, or a particular therapy, and it would work for a few months and then it would fail. And then you would try something else and then you would work for a few months and then you would fail. I'm sure many patients, many veterans can relate to this, where they get this placebo effect that they're going to the doctors and they're hoping they're getting something done and they're taking this drug and they're trying to do that exercising and they're trying to do eating well. But hit after hit, life crisis after life crisis just sort of keeps you down and it keeps it a struggle. I was in one of those cycles where this another therapy was failing me, and a scary therapy. I had gotten to a point where I was on a fentanyl patch and I wasn't getting relief and I wasn't getting the pain control, the quality of life that I needed, that I desperately needed. And there was this time that I needed to start thinking about other therapies. I was having difficulty eating, keeping meds down, really participating in life again. And these cycles that I would go through with my health could be a few days, triggered with a migraine. It keeps it going. It could lead to a few weeks. It could lead to seasons. I have been down for years at a time. And I know there are patients who struggle with that type of life cycle. This particular time I was down, I just didn't want to do it anymore. I was tired of the up and down, try this drug and the fail. It had been 16 years. I didn't really want to go to the doctor with it. Individual told me and suggested cannabis as a way of remedying my current symptoms. And at the time, it was just nausea. I could not keep anything down. I was in a cyclical vomiting situation. My tumor sits on my equilibrium nerve and my hearing nerve. I'm deaf in my left ear, and my facial nerve. And so I get sharp pains. I have an acoustic neuroma, but I also have trigeminal neuralgia, which is a very debilitating and crippling pain condition. It's called the suicide disease because it is the only escape from this type of pain. And the attacks come from nowhere. They could be from a brush on the face, from wearing your hair up. They could be from brushing your teeth. It's a debilitating condition. And cannabis was something that I was curious about. I thought, well, this might be an interesting route to go. And I say that because in 1996, California, November of that year, voted for cannabis to be legal. I was about to enter into brain surgery in 3 weeks when they passed that law, 2 weeks. And I was on a couch with my girlfriend at the time. She was helping taking care of me before surgery because I was very symptomatic. And we saw that happen. And I said to her, I wish that was something that I could try, because they were sharing stories about all kinds of patients using cannabis in California. And if you might remember those stories. And I was just really intrigued. I live in Utah, and it's a very conservative state. And so it has and I just want to say that's not a conversation that's common. We're conservative and a lot of rural, that's not we're not California. and we're a very red state. And so watching this news back in 1996, seeing California come online was amazing. And I said to my friend, oh, I wish it was something I can use. Maybe someday I'll be able to help make that happen in Utah. Not realizing I was manifesting that. I go into brain surgery and have those events. Flash forward to where I'm telling you is I'm sick. I want to try cannabis. And I go to my daughter, who's 19 at the time. And then this is a very strange conversation to have, and you'll learn why. I ask her, please, do you have any friends that smoke weed? Because I want to try cannabis to help mitigate my symptoms. And she did, and introduced me and told me her friend helped me get a bag of weed. My husband had to wait in a Wendy's parking lot to get it and brought it home. And it just seemed silly when we sat there and looked in the bag, and just to think that this little plant could disrupt our lives, our home, our children, everything could be taken away. At the time, my son was 4 years old. My youngest was 4 years old. My oldest was 16. So we had a house full of children, and he is an electrical engineer with a master's degree. And we are about to use something that is going to make us all a felon, and it was mind-boggling to me. There was this emotional battle going on for me that was a lot of propaganda, and I recognized it, and a lot of desperation, because what if this can give me some relief right now? I'm tired of vomiting. I've been sick for so long, and I've been doing this for 16 years. I really felt like I was at my wit's end. I was at not even my final hour, because I knew the torment wouldn't end. I just wanted relief. Being in the medical field prior to having this happen, I felt a desire to document what was taking place. And so I had a pain journal. Every specialist I went to was always telling me to keep a pain journal and write this down. And I have to tell them what my week was like and what my pain level was like. So I'm a little trained as a pain patient to track it. And for curiosity, I wanted a gut check for myself. Do you know what I mean? Like, I needed to know that this was really something that was helping me and not just something that was drugging me out. I didn't know what to expect. I really, truly didn't know what to expect. So I started journaling. I loaded a bowl, because that's all I knew how to use. I loaded it up in a little glass pipe and flicked my Bic and took a hit, documented what I was feeling at the time. I was having pain, where I was having it. I documented the time, the date that it happened. What I did, I just took a hit. There was no other way to measure any of this. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
It's not a pill. And I waited, and I documented the sensation I had. I wrote it down. I documented how it dropped the pain. And with each toke that I don't know how else to call it, but with each toke that I took, I documented the experience. Yeah. And then I brought that into a pain clinic that I was actually visiting. I was getting trigger point injections. And what that is they take needle and they were shooting medication to numb my face. I was getting nerve ablations done where they go in and burn the nerve so they can stop it from sending signals of pain to you. That's what I was having done. And on top of having a pain patch before cannabis was introduced. And so I go into the doctor after 2 weeks, because I didn't tell him for 2 weeks, and they drug test at pain clinics. And I didn't tell him for 2 weeks that I was doing this desperate experiment at home. And when I went in for my 2-week visit, I brought the 2-week documentation of what I'd experienced. And he sat there with my mom. I brought my mom. I'm a grown-ass woman, but I brought my mom, because you need a medical witness. You need a medical witness. If there's anything I could tell your veterans and anybody else who listens to this, always bring somebody with you when you go to the doctors. Mm-hmm. that's another topic. But I brought my mother with me and shared this with that pain doctor. And he wrote in my charts that I was no longer to be drug tested at his clinic. And he stuck with me as I continued the experiment. I did go in to see him, and we both saw the drop in my need for more trigger points. I wanted less in less places. I was getting better sleep at night. I was then recording that I stopped taking my nighttime meds for sleep. I recorded that I stopped taking my muscle relaxers. I was recording that I was lowering my antidepressant. I was being a bit more mobile. I was not having to use my cane more often. My balance was improving. The less pharmaceutical drugs I took, the more cannabis use I had. My entire family saw this shift happen. It was notable. My attacks were less. This was a dramatic change for me and my family. And it was hard to reconcile it because it was illegal.
Yeah.
It was desperately illegal. This is a long story. I'm so sorry if it's going too long.
I love it.
It was a profound experience, those 2 weeks.
Wow.
We hid it from my children. And at the beginning of me starting this, I had been in a bad pain cycle to the point that my husband started smoking, stressed out all the time. This was bad. This was like he had been a smoker in his teens, had quit when we married. This is, 12 years down the road, he's picking up smoking. He's outside smoking cigarettes. And so the kids are accustomed to the smell now. They don't like it. It's not something they're used to, but they're like, Dad just smells like smoke. But now they're smelling something new, but they don't know what it is. There's not a communication about it. The oldest child, of course, knows because she helped, make that situation happen for us. And then it comes to, we need to tell the kids. We're telling the doctors, we're telling the kids, we want to continue this. You guys have seen that Mom is up more in these past 2 weeks, in the past few months. By the 4th month mark, it'd been 2 weeks. It led to 4 months. I was done. I didn't even want to go back to the pain clinic. There was no reason. I was tapering off of my pharmaceuticals by myself, but with, the knowledge that I needed to taper. And I was more mobile. I was eating better. I was drinking water. I was far more active and more alert and more coherent. And for now, that was okay. I didn't know how long this was going to last. I honestly didn't. I thought this was going to be a short-lived experiment like all the other things. I had gotten to a point in my 16 years of, this is just me. This is just my life. This is my cards I was dealt. This is what I have to learn to manage. That's my challenge, right? And I was like, well, I'm just going to ride this one for a while because it's giving me all these benefits. And cannabis was giving me introspection. If that gives you, it was giving me some spirituality back that I had kind of lost because of hope was lost. Pain removes hope. And so cannabis was having a very multi-layer impact on my life, on my body, and my children were seeing it. And it led to having other conversations. And the next conversation, aside from my children and my doctor, was then the extended family. I had to have an important conversation with my parent, my dad. I sent him an email. I wrote this letter, sent him some videos about medical cannabis because, this was 2011. So there are other states that have medical cannabis programs. There are other stories, on the internet that were showing other stories. By the time I've written to my father, I was I was like 6 months into using cannabis. You know, I was a hefty amount of time of, I believe in this thing. I have been reading about Dr. Raphael Mechoulam. I've been reading about Ethan Russo, learning about all these other individuals in the space on the science side, because my background was in science. You know, I worked at the hospital. I was going into nursing school. I was still young. So my draw was that direction. So I was looking at it from like, what is it doing though to my body? Why? It just can't be making me high and that's what's making me feel better. Like, come on, what's happening? What is, my little ADHD brain just wanted to know. And the deep dive led to learning about the endocannabinoid system, learning about the receptors, understanding what cannabinoids are, understanding what phytocannabinoids are, and what like it just blew this king. So like, of course it was. Of course this fits. Of course there is plant medicine. Why wouldn't there be plant medicine? Of course. But now I've got to convince somebody who I have a lot of respect for that I'm going to be using something illegal.
Yeah.
And so I'm sending this email to my dad, and he gets on the phone with me and he's like, Chrissy, I completely support you. Like, he knows the suffering. He knows the ups and downs I've challenged with. He tells me he's watching news stuff in his state about medical cannabis too. He lives in Florida and he's retired. So he lives in the retired community, the villages in Florida. And he's like, you know, all the old people are talking about wanting to use cannabis. And so it was sort of a laugh, and then sort of I think he didn't think it was going to last very long kind of thing or something. I don't know. The reason why it was important, not just aside that he was my dad, but he's a narcotics officer. And I had years of daddy coming to the schools talking about just say no. Like when Nixon came to Florida with the whole anti-drug campaign, my dad's standing in a picture guarding him. Just some little street beat cop, but you know, you got to be someone special to be there, that kind of thing. He's like it so it was there was a heaviness to this whole thing for me. It was, and I need to add, just to give accurate history, I was in a no contact situation with my mother at the time because her use and abuse of cannabis. Just to give you full context and a very large picture of where I was sitting with my lack of knowledge, my consumption of propaganda, and my limited experience. That's where I was in my life, in my little conservative state of Utah. I couldn't quite wrap my head, but there was so much that was melting in my mind with the consumption of cannabis. Because you start learning about the drug war too. Because of course, when I learned about the science, I was livid about the science that I'm seeing. And this was just 2011. There's so much more that's happened since then that I wanted to understand. Well, how did it get to here then? What happened? You start to go learn about the policy. Oh, girl. And I started to learn about the policy.
Well, let's get on policy in a second.
Absolutely. Please stop. Thank you, Holly.
No, we have lots to cover still, but hang on tight. I'm going to pay some bills and we'll come right back.
Yes, absolutely.
And we're back. We're spending some time today with Christine Stenquist, and she was sharing her inspirational story. I was getting tingles like while you were speaking. So I and the whole we're in Wyoming, and so we're probably like right behind you, or I hope we're right behind you. And you're talking about policy, and we're rural and very red and very conservative. Folks here don't even like to talk about industrial hemp or true hemp. They don't even like to talk about that as, even as a cash crop or part of an industry or anything like that. So it's pretty tough out here in Wyoming. So I'm with you on the whole policy grappling for
It is,
sure.
it is challenging, and it starts with, like I was sharing, with my changing one person's mind.
Yeah.
Starting with meeting somebody where they're at. And I met my dad where he was at.
Yeah.
His compassionate side, that his daughter was suffering for so long, and she was willing to risk what he looked at, a very stable, successful life. His son-in-law was a high school dropout. He worked his way through college, became an electrical engineer. They have 4 kids. They're stable. She suffered for 16 years. My dad is not only a narcotics officer, but he was a veteran. He's a Vietnam vet.
Oh.
He knows what PTSD is. He knows the pain. He knows suffering. He knows what I've been experienced. It's something him and I have been able to bond over, in that regard. There's a relatability of long endurance of pain, and so my dad and I have always been close. I have a way of talking with him, and a relatability that we just have always got along. So he had a lot of respect for how hard this was, that I was coming to him, not really asking for permission, but more of, Dad, I want your buy-in. This, because honestly, I wanted it for him. My dad is an alcoholic.
Yeah.
And he was a functioning alcoholic all through his years of being a narcotics officer, because it was the only legal substance that veterans were able to use to treat their PTSD. Because you know what? We don't talk about the pain and the emotional affliction that men go through and that our veterans go through. It's not just the wounded body pain, but it's that, again, like I referenced earlier, that deep spiritual, emotional, and mental disconnection from the body that's going on. And so as somebody who is having this profound 6-month experiment happening for myself, of course, I am now looking to those I want to share. Like, how do you sit on this and not want to share that this is happening for you? Maybe it can work for you. Because at this point, I've learned about the endocannabinoid system. I'm learning that there's some science behind this. So maybe, I know we're not all alike and not everybody can use it, but it might work for you. His support was meaningful. Not needed, but meaningful. It gave me, one, a talking point, because I think it's powerful to have your family be there as you are trying to cope and manage and figure out how your body works and how it can get the most relief.
Yeah.
That kind of support meant something, because it would have devastated me. I think it would have just crushed me if he was so dead against it. And the fact that he was supportive gave me some courage that maybe there's more to this than I realized. I wanted to understand, well, how the hell did we get here? I don't understand this. This doesn't, it's a freaking plant. I got it in a baggie behind freaking Wendy's. My mind couldn't comprehend it, because I didn't die in 6 months. I got better. So something was amiss, something was a lie, and I just couldn't, my little brain could not do. And then you start reading about what happened with cannabis and
Mhm.
the propaganda behind some of it. And, not just the propaganda, because I do try to do a counterbalance in my life. I do want to hear, well, what was the other explanation? What was the other story? A lot of people like to say, prohibition started in 1937 and this, that, and the other. Yeah, and there's deeper history before that happened that I wanted to learn about, things that happened in 1915. Like, you start really getting into the history of things, which I think is incredibly rich.
Yeah.
And it leads to the policy. You start to understand what was culturally happening here in America, the United States, what lands were being taken, who were they trying to push out. It's like deep and rich and a fabric that I think gets brushed over too quickly. I am a mother who is raising children, and I have told them for years not to use drugs. I am now consuming something that is illegal in our home, making the entire house shut down. Nobody can come over to our house. No kids can come play here anymore. It becomes a very weird environment, right?
Mhm.
It is, so there, for me, I am trying to learn why this has happened, because I can't live like this. I can't live like a prisoner in my home, and we cannot be medical refugees. We can't run to a state. Like, my husband has built a network of opportunities. We have connections and friends in this state. We have family. We don't like some of our family, but they're family nonetheless. And we don't want to uproot and move away because of a plant. It's a plant. It was really hard for me to grasp that this was right or just on any freaking level. And I am a fiery little individual, and I'm getting my physical strength back. I wanted to do something about it. But for 16 years, my mind and my brain has been mush. It's just mush. It wasn't functioning. And that girl that showed me how to get weed, hooked me up with her Connect, needed a place to crash, was living with me. And I came across individuals. I wanted to know how to change policy in a state. Like, I can't live like this. And if I have this story and everybody I share it with is having such a reaction to it, maybe there's something here. Maybe this is one of those universe things where you like lean into it.
Mhm.
Like, I don't know, maybe I get in trouble, but what a weird, crazy story to be in the press that they arrest this poor brain tumor lady because she's smoking weed. Because I
Right?
won't shut up if that happens. So I go to these coffee shop meetings like a normal, like it was Students for Sensible Drug Policy, SSDP, one of those national groups,
Mhm.
trying to find somebody in my state who is working on drug policy reform of some kind, something. We don't have
Mhm.
we don't have any kind of cannabis groups in Utah. That ain't a thing. That's just not happening yet. And I hear about this group and I start showing up. Now they're working on like naloxone needle exchange. That we have a lot of opiate use in Utah at the
Mm.
time. A lot of overdoses were happening. Like, was on fentanyl. My
Mhm.
doctor gave it to me just because I had watched a commercial or saw something, and I was just inquiring minds.
Yeah.
So the abuse of substance of pharmaceuticals was really pretty rampant at the time, and
Mm.
students were ODing. So this group, I thought, well, maybe my story can compel them to think broader in drug policy. Yes, I'm for needle exchange and naloxone. I think those things are good. How about we like treat trauma and maybe use plant medicine and get there before that? But you meet people where they are, and that was
Yeah.
the whole point. That's what I was
Yeah.
trying to do. Is so showed up to these coffee shop meeting, and they're telling what's going on with a certain policy that's happening, and I'm listening to them, and I'm like, okay. um, and they ask me who I am because I look like this. I look like an undercover cop. I don't know. I show up looking very conservative, look at mom, and I still was using my cane every now and then, so I think I had a cane at the time or something. I shared my story and I told them that's why I'm here. And they kept having their weekly meetings or every other week or something. They had some kind of meetings that were pretty repetitious. And so I kept showing up. They started working on policy. I was hearing how they were doing policy up on the Hill. And it was really just the kid reporting to the group. I did this with a legislator, and then this is what happens, and the bill goes to committee, just sort of hearing that kind of secondhand experience, that lived experience, not secondhand. And I thought that was intriguing. And I wanted to learn. I wanted to go up and learn. I wanted to be up at the Capitol and learn it. And so at the time, I was running just a Facebook group. I talked to you about how I was trying to get my mind working again. My son, who was 16 at the time, my daughter was 19, he's 16. He taught me how to use social media. Like, I hadn't been on Facebook. I didn't do MySpace. I was offline. 1996 is when the internet came online, is when I went nowhere. Yeah. I went nowhere. So I wasn't using a computer. Like, my husband would try to get me to log in to check bank statements. This is how you check where the bank is. Like, I couldn't even do that because I couldn't remember the passwords, and then everything was always updating, and it would upset me that I couldn't keep up with shit. Technology still keeps me crazy, but it was exceptionally challenging then. My son's teaching me about Facebook, and then you go in here, Mom, and this is how you make friends, and this is how you find groups, and this is how you do this. And, it was very cute, but I didn't have friends. I was living in isolation. So I'm playing Farmville and, hi, here's my corn, just being very small, just not taking up space. And like I said, my son starts teaching me about groups and how you can form your own group. And I started being able to Google different cannabis groups and stuff. And I really didn't like how they were presenting information. It was very slang, it was counterculture, heavily influenced, the flower, the leaf, and everything. And I knew for Utah how reactionary those are. It's a duality, like so many things in life. The plant is a symbol, the leaf is a symbol of freedom, of peace, of love, of healing for some people. And in the flip side, it has that counter effect of rebellion and anarchy and chaos and craze and whatever the heck. So I was scared about associating my lived experience with what I was seeing culturally they wanted us to view it as.
Yes.
I wanted to change the tone. I wanted to change the acceptance of it, because I had such an amazing experience with this plant on deep levels here, and having such profound epiphanies about my role with it. How do I utilize this to share with community, to share, to change societal look on it? The doctor was impressed. I went to another doctor, though, who wasn't impressed and wasn't keen and was never going to be quite comfortable, which is fine. I didn't go back to him. I worked on my healing away from Western medicine and started to listen to myself more and trust myself more on what my healing path could be. And could
beautiful.
Thank you. It was, Holly, I tried to explain to your son, Red Hawk, it's been such a unique love affair. It's been and not to be too woo-woo about it, but when something you start using moves you in a way to work, you just have, and that's really where I was with this. And in turn, I wanted to give it the same respect. So showing up in these coffee shops, hearing about policy, I started a Facebook group. From the Facebook group, I started to put up content that was very mindful, that was well-sourced, was reputable, because it meant something to me. It needed, I didn't know all the things, and maybe somebody would come in and tell me and correct me, because there was people who'd been in the cannabis space much longer than I. And I loved that. I loved that we could learn from somebody else who had education, who was a grower, who an extractor in another state, or a patient in another state. So it really started to build a bit of a community.
Mm.
One of those community members sent me privately a Facebook flyer about a lady who was doing a tour on Capitol Hill. Now, I'd done the coffee shop meetings with this little student group, and I wasn't a student, and I wanted to kind of figure out the process. I was like really proud of these guys of doing this, but I needed to go also figure out how to do my own. And so I went up to the Capitol for this, come take a tour of the Capitol and see this before the session starts and stuff. It was a lady who was doing nonprofit work for the homeless, which, again, appeals to me. So I went down there, and, there was probably 15, 20 of us that showed up for this little tour. And she's walking us to different little aspects of the Capitol and all these little, this statue, that statue. This is the Senate chambers. This is what happens here. And, that kind of thing.
Yeah.
And explaining this stuff, and inviting us, because I started peppering her with questions. And then she told me, you should come to the Capitol on Monday. I'm like, great, I'd love to. And I showed up when she told me to. And she showed me what she does on the Capitol, what she does to be a lobbyist for the underprivileged and the homeless. And at the time that year, it's a Republican state. They were going to try to hire raised food tax or something along those lines. So they were a group that was very mindful of the underprivileged lived experience. Yeah. So when those tax increases and that kind of conversation happens, they would be up at the Capitol trying to amend bills, lobby against bills, or even pass legislation that's supportive, that gets our homeless, our unsheltered population into better environments, if for better pathways for that, that kind of thing. So when we're up there and she's sharing me with this, my head's turning about how do I implement what she's showing me for the cannabis movement? How do I humanize my patient's lived experience? Because you're judged by how you show up. And there's a lot of people, one, who already use cannabis and know it's beneficial, and there's aesthetic that starts to adopt, and you're judged by your aesthetics. Yeah. You live in a conservative state. So I was really struggling with and I watched her humanize it. I watched, because I volunteered for her. Now, after I had that lived experience, that session for 45 days, I was up here with her. She brought up religious individuals. She brought up the clergy in our state from all denominations, to work on the homeless topics and those underprivileged, which makes sense. These are their congregation members. So yes, they're there. It was a beautiful display of seeing the right people in front of legislators sharing the right stories, helping them understand their lived experience, what kind of, services they're having to provide to their congregation members and that type of thing. And so it was very powerful for me to implement that model. Yeah. Sharing my story, Tommy's story, firefighter Joe's story, whomever's story. I've got Crohn's patients, MS patients, veterans, PTSD patients that are all in my little Facebook group. And I want to humanize them. But some of them have dreadlocks, and some of them have, gauges, or some of them aren't LDS. And most of our elected officials here are. And just that angst can really not get your voice heard, so there was a lot of dynamics on how do I change policy? I don't want to live trapped in my house smoking weed and covering up the door so the smoke doesn't get out to the rest of the house, and cracking window. Like, who wants to live like that? Insanity over a plant. So it was that policy experience that I felt like needed to really happen. And I
Yeah.
started a nonprofit. I pulled together information online on how do you start a nonprofit. I found a few people who were had been watching me and on the social media, who were willing to take a chance. And that's the key thing, is those who are willing to walk with you
Yeah.
bravely. And we formed a nonprofit, and we tried. I branched off from the students for, drug policy pay in a partnership. I was supportive of what they were doing when I was up on the Hill lobbying with those clergy for the homeless issues. I was pushing policy and sharing with legislators, because I'm there, about the naloxone bill, about that. So it was my first taste on how to do it. And we passed unanimously our naloxone bill and our needle exchange bill in our state. And I do honestly believe it's because the legislators saw individuals show up who cared about it. I was teaching the clergy, because you have to wait for legislators to come out to talk to you. So you talk smack with those who are out in the hallway with you, and they're like, what are you doing? And I loved talking about drug policy change as a narcotics officer's daughter. And so I wanted to educate. I always took it as an opportunity to educate that why these harm reduction tools are so important. Because from needle exchange, I was always able to bounce into cannabis, and how cannabis could be a bit of a preemptive. It was sharing stories. And I know that's what your podcast is about, and really why I wanted to come on so bad. Is it vital? Even in rural states, and you think about culturally and the long lineage of humans, that is how we share, is through storytelling. And I just felt like if I could somehow provide an umbrella for patients, a protected shield of some kind for them to come and share their stories, these elected officials throughout the state, not just our legislators. I needed to buy in from city, county officials, like everywhere. If they could get to understand that you're either a patient or a caregiver in life, and how this is a compassionate thing that we should consider, it really started to change people. It moved away from a combative of, authoritarian of it's against the law because let's dig into that a little bit. Let's dig into why is it against the law? What actual harm is coming from cannabis that we don't see from alcohol? Much worse and legal, or nicotine. I like to do the alcohol comparison because it's so widely acceptable and so damaging to us culturally and in our body,
Amazing. So this is going to air on Citizen Green TV. We're going to take a really quick break, do a quick tribute to the troops. We'll come back, and I would love to hear more specifics on what exactly you passed and what is happening in Utah now. So stay tuned. We'll be right back.
Thank you.
we are back, spending time today with Christine Stenquist, a cannabis impatient advocate, and she's been sharing her stories and how she got into policy making there in Utah. Kind of a David and Goliath type situation with many challenges in the policy and legislator and getting good stuff passed. What
Yeah.
were you able to pass specifically, and where would you like to see things going in the future as we close out the show?
Oh, we doing all of that stuff, we were able to pull together a campaign to pass a ballot initiative. So after trying tirelessly to work with legislators and really not being heard and feeling the death grip of no,
Mm.
we took it a citizens initiative and wrote a ballot initiative. We passed it in 2018. And then we got that passed. I made my way actually to Wyoming, started doing a little speaking tour in there to help you guys get kick-started as well. Worked on helping co-write your ballot initiative for the 2021. I don't know if you guys remember that. Came back to Utah and saw that got our dispensaries online in 2020. We have 15 dispensaries in our state. We have 8, I think it's now 9 grows in our state. We have a program. It's really important that you pay attention to the policy that you create in your state and that you don't haphazardly create something or make concessions that actually harm patients and people and businesses. We still had a lot of reluctancy and no's and a lot of infighting in our industry, and with not with just within the industry, but with the policy creators. And it's a lot of tension. This is a tough topic. It's going to take a long time to change that prohibition boat around. So what I would like to see is more improvement in our policies, not just at the legislative level, because there's multiple levels, but in our rulemaking. Once your programs come online and you have an ag department or the health department that's managing your pharmacies and your dispensaries, there's a lot that goes on in rulemaking that affects businesses, that affects patients, and that needs to be mined and watched. So I would encourage people to not just educate yourself, learn the history, learn the science, learn the patient advocacy, help change things, but you got to show up. You got to show up and start having those conversations. So that's really the whole arc of my story. Is it's never over. This will be a baton passing. We are passing it to the next generation to help us turn this boat around and to help keep creating change, keep creating new programs. Wyoming needs help. We need states that have programs and see our sister states that are struggling. Our advocates need to cross state lines and lend a hand. And that's what I hope I continue to do for Wyoming. I hope folks like you keep reaching out, and I just want to help. I think this needs to be changed at a federal level, and watching that rescheduling conversation go on. Again, I'll reiterate my point. We need to be careful about conceding to things that aren't good or healthy or appropriate for the sake of, oh, it looks like progress. We don't want Trojan horses. We don't need the charades. We need truthfulness in our policy creation and in how we engage with this. It's not helping our communities to have propaganda. It hurts us. And so let's just be a creation of truth and change. You know, it's not hard, folks. Come on.
Half of it is showing up. I love that. And then you follow a quote. The one voice really can change everything. So sometimes I feel like I'm the little man alone out in the desert. Just kind of. So I love talking to you. I hope you come back again real soon. And hopefully we can continue to keep in touch and collaborate in the future. So we'll have to see what happens and stay tuned. Hey, Christine, thank you so much for coming on. You have a great day. Until next time out there, folks, stay safe.